The early morning light gently filtered through the grand windows of Thomas Bennett's mansion, casting soft golden hues across the polished marble floors. It was the start of another busy day in his meticulously ordered life. He had built his fortune from the ground up, but the toll it had taken on his personal life was becoming increasingly evident. With a quick glance at the clock, Thomas sighed and straightened his tie. Today, there was yet another high-profile business meeting with potential partners from Japan. The stakes were high, and he needed to be on top of his game. "Good morning, Mr. Bennett," greeted his driver, Robert, as he opened the door of the limousine. Thomas merely nodded, his mind already racing through the agenda for the day. He sank into the plush leather seat, his fingers quickly tapping away on his phone as the car eased out of the driveway and onto the road. The city was still waking up, its streets empty save for the occasional morning jogger or delivery truck. Yet there was something different in the air that day. Maybe it was the unusually clear sky, or perhaps the serene quietness of the morning that seemed to hum with a strange kind of energy. Thomas felt an odd tension in the atmosphere, as if the world itself were waiting for something important to unfold. But he shook it off, dismissing the feeling as nothing more than pre-meeting nerves. The car glided smoothly down the street, but suddenly, without warning, Robert slammed on the brakes, jerking Thomas forward in his seat. "What's going on?" Thomas asked, irritation creeping into his voice. Robert pointed to the front of the car, where two small figures stood at the edge of the sidewalk. "Children, sir, just standing there." Thomas squinted out the window and saw them. Two young girls, no older than 6 or 7, standing motionless on the curb. Their hair was tangled and wild, and their clothes were far too big for their tiny bodies, with patches in places that suggested they had been through far more than their fair share of hardships. The girls looked fragile, vulnerable, out of place in this busy city center, especially at such an early hour. Thomas frowned. What on earth are they doing out here alone? He muttered to himself. His instincts screamed that something was wrong, but the girls didn't seem to be in immediate danger. "Wait here," he ordered, stepping out of the car, his shoes clicking against the pavement. The cool morning air greeted him, and he adjusted his jacket as he approached the two girls. As he drew closer, he noticed that their eyes were not wide with fear, as one might expect from children in such a situation. Instead, their gazes were steady, almost piercing, as if they were waiting for something or someone. "Hey, what are you doing out here all alone?" Thomas asked, his voice gentle but firm. The taller of the two, a girl with light brown hair tied in a messy ponytail, stepped forward. "I'm Lily," she said, her voice unexpectedly clear for someone so young. "This is my sister Sophie." The other girl, Sophie, stood slightly behind her, her dark eyes wide and watchful, as though she were waiting to see how Thomas would react. "Where are your parents?" Thomas asked, his concern growing. It was highly unusual for children this young to be out by themselves, especially in the early hours of the morning. "Our mom's in heaven," Lily answered without missing a beat. Her words, though spoken softly, struck a chord in Thomas. Orphans. He knew that pain all too well from his own childhood. A knot tightened in his chest, but he kept his composure. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said, his tone softening. "But you shouldn't be out here alone. It's dangerous, especially at this hour." Sophie, the quieter of the two, looked up at him with big, earnest eyes. "We need your help," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The sincerity in her words unsettled Thomas. There was something about these girls, something beyond their small size and tender age, that made him pause. Thomas looked around, scanning the area for any sign of an adult nearby. There were no other people in sight, just the two girls standing there. "What do you need help with?" Thomas asked, glancing at his watch. The meeting was scheduled to begin soon, but something in the pit of his stomach told him that this was not something he could ignore. Lily opened the small weathered backpack she was carrying and pulled out a battered notebook. "We want you to write a letter for us," she said, handing it over to him. Thomas looked down at the notebook. It was old, the edges curled, and the pages faded. It seemed absurd. He had a meeting that could change the course of his company, and yet here he was, standing on the sidewalk, being asked by two children to write a letter to someone who had already passed away. Write a letter, Thomas repeated, confusion clouding his mind. To who? To our mom, Sophie said quietly, as though the answer was obvious. We want to tell her we miss her. Thomas blinked, taken aback. The request was simple, yet it hit him harder than he expected. He had no idea what to say, but there was something so earnest, so pure, about their request that he couldn't bring himself to dismiss them. With a heavy sigh, Thomas looked at the girls. He was late. His whole day was planned down to the minute. But something about these two little girls, standing there with their hearts exposed, made him stop. All right. Thomas relented, his voice softening. Let's sit over there, and I'll write the letter for you. The girls smiled at him, their faces lighting up with identical expressions of joy that seemed to transform them entirely. It was as if they had won a small victory. As they walked toward a nearby bench, Thomas followed, his heart strangely heavy, but also unexpectedly full. Something was changing, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this small act of kindness, would end up being far more important than the business meeting he was so desperate to attend. Sitting down with the twins on either side of him, Thomas looked at the faded notebook. As he prepared to write, he realized that these 5 minutes, these simple moments of connection, had already begun to change his life. As Thomas sat between Lily and Sophie on the park bench, the cool morning air felt heavier than before, as if the weight of their request had begun to settle on his shoulders. His mind, initially focused on his business meeting, had now shifted entirely to these two small, fragile lives sitting beside him. He took a deep breath and looked at the faded notebook in his hands. It seemed like such an ordinary thing. An old notebook with dog-eared pages and a few loose sheets tucked inside. Yet it was the key to something much deeper than he could have imagined. Lily, with her serious expression, leaned in closer, her little hands clasped in her lap as she waited for him to write. Sophie, on the other hand, seemed a little more hesitant, her wide eyes studying him closely. Her earlier wariness had softened, but there was still a quiet intensity to the way she watched him, as if she were silently weighing him. So, what do you want to tell her? Thomas asked gently, trying to break the silence, though his voice faltered as he realized just how difficult this task was going to be. He had been in countless boardrooms, negotiating multi-million-dollar deals, but none of that experience seemed to matter now. This was real. These girls needed him, and for the first time in a long time. Thomas felt completely out of his depth. Lily spoke first. We want to tell her that we miss her, she said, her voice carrying a quiet sincerity that tugged at his heart. We miss her every day. And we still think about her, even when we're asleep. We keep her photo under our pillows. Sophie, who had been quiet, spoke up next, her voice soft but steady. We want her to know that we're being brave. We try to be brave every day. Thomas swallowed hard. The simplicity of their words hit him like a wave. How could he possibly capture the depth of their grief and longing in a few short sentences? How could he do justice to the love they clearly still held for their mother? Sophie looked up at him, her eyes filled with an unspoken question. Can you write that we're okay? That we're trying our best? The weight of their words echoed in his mind as he picked up the worn pencil that Sophie had handed him. He was no writer, no poet, but these girls deserved more than a few empty words. They needed their emotions captured, their love for their mother preserved. He could feel the pressure mounting, not just to write, but to say something that would honor the bond these children shared with the woman they had lost. Okay, Thomas said, his voice tight. He began to write, slowly at first, carefully forming the words. He wrote about their mother, about how much they missed her, about their small acts of bravery in her absence. As he wrote, he found himself becoming more immersed in their world, their emotions. It was as if the girl's raw honesty had stripped away the layers of his own guarded heart, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel something beyond the confines of his high-powered career. He paused after writing a few lines, looking down at the notebook. "Do you want to tell her anything else?" he asked, glancing at the girls. They both nodded, their eyes focused on him with an almost childlike trust, as if they believed he could somehow make the impossible happen. Sophie pulled a small, crumpled photograph from her pocket and handed it to him. "This is our mom," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We want her to know that we still remember how beautiful she was, and that we're still here, trying our best, even though she's not." Thomas took the photo from her, his fingers trembling slightly as he unfolded it. He was prepared for what he might see, perhaps a picture of a woman he vaguely remembered from his past. But when he looked at the photo, he was struck by the familiarity of the face staring back at him. It was her, Sarah Miller, the girl who had once been his friend, his confidant, the person who had pulled him from the darkest corners of his life when he had nowhere else to turn. His heart skipped a beat, and his breath caught in his throat. The memories of their shared childhood came rushing back. Sarah's laughter, her kindness, the way she had always believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. And then, suddenly, she was gone. "Sarah," he whispered under his breath, barely able to believe the realization that had just hit him. The girls were her daughters, his old friend's children, lost and alone in the world. Sophie, noticing his shock, looked at him with wide eyes. "You knew her, didn't you?" she asked, her voice full of innocence. "You were friends." Thomas nodded slowly, his throat tight. He could hardly speak. Memories of his past with Sarah flooded back. How she had been the one person who had ever offered him true kindness, even when he had nothing to give in return. But life had pulled them apart. He had moved on, focused on his career, and forgotten the girl who had once been his closest friend. "Yes," he finally managed to say, his voice cracking. "I knew your mother a long time ago. She was very special." Lily's eyes softened, and she placed a small hand on his arm. "She always said you would come back for us," she said softly, her voice full of trust. "She always said that an angel would come for us one day. Maybe it's you." The words hit him like a punch to the stomach. An angel? He was no angel. He was just a man who had long ago lost his way. But as he sat there, holding the notebook with the girls' words, listening to them talk about their mother as if she were still watching over them, something inside him shifted. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could be the one to help them now. He wiped a tear from his cheek before the girls could see, and with newfound resolve, he signed the letter. "I'll help you," he promised softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll help you and take care of you. You're not alone anymore." The twins smiled, their eyes lighting up with relief. For the first time in months, they felt hope begin to stir in their hearts, and for Thomas, a weight he hadn't even realized he was carrying began to lift. This was just the beginning of something far bigger than any business deal or meeting. This was a chance to make things right, a chance to rediscover the kind of person he used to be. As they walked back to the limousine, Thomas could feel the burden of his past slowly melting away. The future, his future, was no longer about power and wealth. It was about love, redemption, and the promise he had just made to two little girls who had unknowingly brought him back to life. Thomas sat silently in the back of the limousine as the city passed by in a blur of towering buildings and bustling streets. His mind was miles away, replaying the moment he had just shared with Lily and Sophie. The letter, the photo, the realization that these two little girls were Sarah Miller's daughters, all of it had hit him harder than he expected. He had promised them that he would help, but what did that promise really mean? The journey to the girls' small, run-down apartment felt like a dream, like he was stepping into a world he barely recognized. He had always lived in a bubble of wealth and privilege, surrounded by luxury, but nothing about the life of the twins seemed luxurious. They were alone, surviving in a cramped, dimly lit apartment where the walls seemed to echo with silence and neglect, and he had never noticed. As the car stopped outside the building, Thomas looked at the worn-out structure before him. The windows were cracked, the paint peeling away like layers of time that had forgotten to move forward. The once bright colors of the building were now muted, weathered by years of neglect and hardship. For a moment, he wondered if he was in the right place. How could two young children be living in a building like this, without proper care, without anyone to look after them? And yet, here they were, Lily and Sophie, resilient and determined to survive in a world that had already taken so much from them. Is this really where they live? He muttered to himself. He couldn't believe it. He had imagined a different life for them, one filled with warmth and security. But reality was far more harsh. He stepped out of the limousine, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his shoulders. As he made his way toward the entrance, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to face something far bigger than a simple act of kindness. This was about responsibility, about making things right, not just for the girls, but for himself too. It was about fixing the past mistakes he had made by ignoring Sarah all those years ago. Inside the building, the dim lighting did little to disguise the signs of decay. The elevator was out of order, and the stairwell reeked of old, musty air. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, and the faint smell of mildew hung in the air, a testament to the building's deteriorating condition. Thomas climbed the stairs, each step creaking under his weight, the sound echoing through the empty hallways. His eyes flickered to the worn-out doors on either side, wondering if the other tenants knew just how little the building had to offer in terms of safety or comfort. Finally, he reached the third floor and stopped in front of the door to apartment 2C. He hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the doorbell. Was he really ready for this? Ready to confront the reality of what had become of Sarah's daughters? There was no going back now. This was the moment he had to face. Taking a deep breath, he rang the bell. The door creaked open, and there stood Greta, the elderly woman who had been looking after the girls since Sarah passed. Her frail frame was hunched slightly, but there was strength in her eyes. She didn't seem surprised to see him. Instead, she gave him a knowing look, as if she had been expecting this moment all along. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice steady despite her age. "I've been expecting you." Thomas nodded, trying to push down the knot in his throat. He had a million things he wanted to say, but nothing seemed to come out. Instead, he simply followed Greta inside, his heart heavy with guilt and determination. The apartment was small, cluttered with the remnants of lives that had been lived in scarcity. The walls were covered with handmade drawings, scribbles and colors from the twins, full of life and innocence in a place that had no room for such things. A single bed in the corner of the room was occupied by both Lily and Sophie, their little bodies curled up together as if they needed each other for warmth and security. They looked so small, so fragile in the space they called home. Greta led Thomas into the living room, where the twins were playing quietly. They looked up as he entered, and their faces lit up with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. They had been waiting for him, and now that he was here, there was a sense of hope in their eyes, hope that had been absent since Sarah's death. "Hello, girls," Thomas said softly, kneeling down to their level. "How are you both doing?" Sophie, the quieter of the two, gave him a shy smile. "We're okay," she said, her voice small but steady. "We're always okay." Lily, on the other hand, was more expressive. "We're so glad you came back," she said, her words filled with sincerity. "Mom said you'd be here. She said an angel would come for us." Thomas blinked, swallowing the lump in his throat. The twins had been through so much already, and yet, here they were, still holding on to the hope that someone would come for them. And he had promised Sarah that he would be there for them. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere," Thomas said, his voice firm with conviction. "I'll take care of you both. I'll make sure you're safe and happy." The words felt heavy, but they also felt right. For the first time in a long time, Thomas realized that this was where he was needed. Not in the boardroom, not in the endless chase for money or power, but here, helping these two little girls build a life after everything they had lost. Over the next few days, Thomas worked to make changes. He arranged for the girls to have a better living situation, starting with a new apartment. He hired the best doctors to ensure that Lily and Sophie received the proper medical care and nutrition they needed. He also enrolled them in school, determined to give them a chance at a better life. But the responsibility wasn't just about the material things. Thomas had to learn how to be there for them emotionally as well. He had to guide them, help them navigate their grief, and show them that they were not alone. The guilt weighed heavily on him as he sat with them at the dinner table, watching them eat with the kind of enthusiasm he had never seen in a child before. It wasn't just about the food. It was about the fact that they were finally getting to experience what it felt like to be taken care of. It was about giving them the stability they had been lacking for so long. That evening, as he tucked them into bed, Thomas realized that this was where he was meant to be. He had a long road ahead of him, one filled with challenges and hurdles, but for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose. These girls were his responsibility now, and he would do everything in his power to give them the life they deserved. The next morning, Thomas woke up early, ready to face whatever came next. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he also knew that he was no longer walking it alone. Lily and Sophie had entered his life at a time when he needed them most. They had shown him what really mattered, and now he would show them that love and family were worth fighting for. The morning sun had barely risen when Thomas Bennett awoke, but it wasn't the usual hustle of his busy life that pulled him from his slumber. It was the soft sounds of the twins stirring in the other room. Little footsteps, a sleepy murmur, and the faint laughter that came from the twins as they started their day. A sense of warmth flooded his chest, and for the first time in years, he felt an unfamiliar, but comforting, sense of peace. His life had been defined by meetings, deadlines, and the constant pursuit of success. But now, everything had shifted. Thomas had been working relentlessly for the past few weeks, ensuring that the girls were well taken care of. It wasn't just about the new apartment, or the better food, or even the toys he had bought them. It was about stability. He was learning how to be there for them in ways that went far beyond what he'd ever expected. He had assumed that he was ready to tackle any challenge. But this, being the guardian to two young girls, was something entirely new. It was more than a responsibility. It was a commitment. And no matter how daunting it seemed at times, he was determined to make it work. The day ahead was already packed with appointments and tasks, but it was also the first Saturday he would spend fully with Lily and Sophie. No work, no distractions. For the past few weeks, he had been juggling his business responsibilities while trying to be there for them. But today, he had promised to take them to the park, to spend time just being a family. He wasn't sure how to navigate this new life, but he knew one thing. He was going to try his best. "Morning, Mr. Bennett." Sophie's cheerful voice greeted him as he entered the kitchen, where she was already seated at the table with a bowl of cereal. Her tiny legs swung beneath the chair as she eagerly looked up at him, her eyes wide with anticipation. Lily, sitting across from her, had a mischievous smile on her face as she stirred her cereal absent-mindedly. "Good morning, Sophie, Lily," Thomas said with a smile, his voice more relaxed than it had been in years. He poured himself a cup of coffee, but instead of focusing on emails and phone calls as he used to, he focused on the sound of the girls laughing and the way they bickered playfully over who could finish their breakfast first. For the first time, his mind was quiet, not clouded by the noise of his work. "So, what's the plan for today?" Lily asked, her eyes gleaming with excitement. It was clear from the look on her face that the idea of spending a whole day with Thomas was something special. She had become more open in recent weeks, her initial wariness melting away as she grew more comfortable with her new life. "We're going to the park," Thomas replied, leaning against the counter and grinning. "And we'll have lunch at your favorite cafe afterward. How does that sound?" Yay! Sophie clapped her hands, her face lighting up. Lily nodded enthusiastically, though she seemed a little more reserved than her twin sister. The rest of the morning was filled with the bustle of getting ready. There were small things to do: lacing up shoes, packing a picnic basket, making sure the girls had their favorite toys for the ride. Thomas marveled at how much joy these small, simple tasks brought him. He had spent years running a business, making important decisions, earning millions, but he had never known joy like this. These moments, though seemingly insignificant, felt like the most important part of his day. By the time they arrived at the park, the sun was higher in the sky, casting a warm golden light over the green spaces and walking paths. The park was a far cry from the hectic, noise-filled streets of the city. It was a place where the world seemed to slow down, where laughter echoed, and children's voices filled the air. Lily and Sophie immediately ran ahead, their small hands clasped together as they raced toward the swings. Thomas followed at a slower pace, enjoying the serenity that came with just being present. As the girls swung higher and higher, their laughter filling the air, Thomas sat on the nearby bench, watching them with a mixture of pride and disbelief. These two little girls had changed his life in ways he couldn't have imagined. They had brought him back to life, forcing him to slow down and rediscover the things that truly mattered. He had spent so many years chasing success, but now he realized he had found something far more valuable: connection, family, love. "Watch, Mr. Bennett," Sophie called from the swing, her legs pumping as she tried to go higher. "I can go higher than Lily." Thomas chuckled and nodded. "You're doing great, Sophie." Lily, not to be outdone, yelled from her swing, "I'm going to touch the clouds." Her confidence was growing with each day, and it filled Thomas's heart with a deep, unspoken pride. He could see the potential in both of them. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were thriving. After a while, the girls tired themselves out and collapsed onto the soft grass beside him, their faces flushed with excitement. They lay back, looking up at the sky, content in the way only children could be. "I like it here," Lily said softly, her voice quieter than usual. "I feel happy." Thomas smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. "I'm glad. I want you both to always feel happy and safe." Sophie, her head resting on her sister's shoulder, sighed contentedly. "I like having a dad. I never thought I'd have one." Thomas felt a lump rise in his throat. It was moments like these that made everything worth it. The endless meetings, the pressure, the sleepless nights. Nothing compared to this. Nothing compared to being here, with these two beautiful souls who had already become the center of his universe. Later that day, as they sat down at the cafe for lunch, Thomas couldn't help but reflect on the path that had brought him here. He had been so consumed with his business, his career, and the idea of success. But now he understood that true success wasn't measured by the deals you closed or the wealth you accumulated. True success was about the people you loved, the lives you touched, and the family you built. As the girls chatted excitedly over their meals, Thomas made a vow to himself. He was going to be the father they deserved, the one who would be there for them through thick and thin, who would support them, guide them, and show them the love they had always been missing. And he would do it all, not because of guilt, but because he genuinely loved them. And they were now his family. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of joy. They went to the petting zoo, tried ice cream, and spent hours laughing together. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Thomas couldn't help but feel that he was exactly where he needed to be. This wasn't just a new beginning for Lily and Sophie. It was a new beginning for him too. As they headed home, Thomas looked over at the twins, their faces beaming with happiness. This was the life he had been searching for, the life that mattered. And for the first time in years, he felt like he was finally home.